Let's get uncomfortable, because bourbon drinkers love confidence. They love believing they know what's good, what's premium, what's worth the money. But here's the truth nobody likes hearing. Some popular bottles disappoint. Some ignored bottles over-deliver. And the difference isn't always quality. It's perception. It's branding. It's expectation. Today, we're diving into one of the most controversial topics in American whiskey: which bourbons consistently underwhelm and which ones shock you when you actually taste them. Not based on hype, not based on marketing, not based on price, but based on what happens in the glass. This is Behind the Barrel. Before we start naming bottles, we need to clear something up. Worst does not mean undrinkable. Best does not mean luxury, because bourbon is emotional. Heavily emotional. People don't just drink bourbon, they defend it. They build identities around brands. They attach pride to labels, which is exactly why ranking videos trigger so much rage. But this video isn't about attacking distilleries. It's about expectation versus experience. There are bottles people buy because they're famous, yet quietly feel underwhelmed. And there are bottles people ignore, yet leave drinkers shocked by their quality. We're exploring perception gaps, value gaps, experience gaps. Because sometimes the disappointment isn't about bad whiskey, it's about inflated expectations. And sometimes greatness hides behind boring branding. Let's start with the uncomfortable half. Some bourbons suffer from reputation inflation. They're not terrible, but they're victims of their own hype. When a bottle becomes legendary, iconic, culturally embedded, your brain expects magic, fireworks, transcendence. Yet what you taste is often simply bourbon. Solid, decent, but nowhere near the mythical image built around it. This is where disappointment lives. Not because the whiskey is bad, but because expectation became unrealistic. Many drinkers experience this with heavily mainstream bottles. The taste is fine, but the emotional buildup destroys satisfaction. It's psychological sabotage. The bottle didn't fail, your expectations did, and that creates the illusion of mediocrity. Let's talk about price discomfort. Nothing creates regret faster than expensive disappointment. You buy a bottle expecting superiority, complexity, depth, transformation. Yet what happens? You pour, you sip, and your brain whispers, "That's it?" The whiskey might be technically well made, but the perceived upgrade never arrives because price reshapes perception. Higher price equals higher expectation. Higher expectation equals harsher judgment. Suddenly, a good bourbon feels average, not because it changed, because your standards did. This psychological effect ruins many premium tier purchases. The bottle isn't weak, your expectation curve became brutal. Scarcity creates illusions. Limited releases, allocated bottles, hard-to-find labels. Your brain equates difficulty with excellence. If it's rare, it must be extraordinary. But rarity often reflects distribution strategy, not taste superiority. Many hyped bottles taste good, some taste excellent, but very few justify the myth. And when reality collides with anticipation, disappointment intensifies, because scarcity amplified imagination. Drinkers don't taste whiskey anymore. They taste expectation debt. And when that debt isn't repaid, regret feels like betrayal. Brand loyalty is powerful, dangerously powerful. Once drinkers emotionally attach to a distillery, objectivity dissolves. Every release becomes great. Every variation becomes interesting. But sometimes consistency fades. Batches vary. Yet loyalty blocks honest evaluation. Then comes the uncomfortable moment, blind tasting, where labels disappear, where prestige evaporates, where taste stands alone. And suddenly, favorites stumble, because loyalty protected perception, not experience. The harshest disappointment, when a bottle carries legendary status yet delivers ordinary pleasure. Not bad, not flawed, just normal, drinkable, competent, but emotionally underwhelming. These bottles hurt most because drinkers feel psychologically cheated. They didn't buy whiskey, they bought mythology, and mythology rarely survives contact with reality. Now let's flip the discomfort, because bourbon has another secret: hidden excellence. Bottles ignored, underestimated, dismissed by branding or price, yet shockingly satisfying. Let's talk about those. Some bourbons punch far above their price. They deliver richness, balance, character, without financial pain. These bottles create emotional satisfaction because low expectation equals high reward. Psychology again. When you expect decent and taste fantastic, pleasure intensifies, value perception magnifies enjoyment. Suddenly the bottle feels heroic, not because it's perfect, because it over-delivered. Some bottles hide behind boring branding, no luxury aura, no flashy prestige, no intimidating price. Yet inside, outstanding whiskey. Drinkers approach casually, sip casually, then freeze mid-glass. Wait, this is really good. This is the magic of underestimated bottles. Pleasant surprise amplifies enjoyment. Expectation works in your favor. Not every great bourbon is complex. Some excel because they're approachable, smooth, balanced, friendly. Perfect gateways into the category. These bottles succeed because they reduce friction. They welcome newcomers. They avoid harshness. They create positive first experiences, which builds lifelong loyalty. Consistency is underrated brilliance. Some bourbons rarely shock, but rarely disappoint. Every bottle reliable. Every pour dependable. No drama, no surprises, just trust. In whiskey, trust is gold. The greatest bottles? Not always the rarest, not always the oldest, but those where expectation and reality align. You anticipate quality, you taste quality. No illusion, no regret, just satisfaction. There is one experience every bourbon drinker secretly fears: blind tasting. Because blind tasting removes identity, removes prestige, removes brand loyalty, removes emotional attachment, and suddenly, your favorite bottle stands naked. No label armor, no reputation shield, no price justification. Just liquid, just taste. And this is where uncomfortable truths emerge. Bottles we defend passionately often collapse under blind conditions, not because they're bad, but because branding carried part of the pleasure. Expectation flavored the experience. Prestige amplified perception. When those psychological enhancers disappear, reality hits differently. Drinkers discover something deeply unsettling. I don't actually love this as much as I thought. Blind tasting doesn't just test whiskey. It tests ego. It tests identity. It tests self-deception, which is why so many enthusiasts avoid it. Because sometimes the label was doing half the work. Let's get even more uncomfortable. Price literally changes taste perception. This isn't opinion, this is psychology. When you know a bourbon is expensive, your brain anticipates complexity, depth, sophistication, and anticipation reshapes sensory interpretation. You don't just taste whiskey, you taste expectation. Higher price creates greater perceived smoothness, greater perceived richness, greater perceived balance, even when the liquid is identical. Yes, identical. Studies repeatedly show that perceived value alters enjoyment, which means something disturbing. Part of what you love may not be in the glass, it may be in your head. Price becomes a psychological seasoning, an invisible flavor enhancer, and once you understand this, you can never untaste it. Scarcity creates madness. Allocated bottles, limited editions, hard-to-find releases. Suddenly, bourbon becomes a treasure hunt, and treasure hunts rewire perception. Difficulty inflates perceived quality. If everyone is chasing it, it must be extraordinary. But scarcity often reflects distribution strategy, not superior liquid. Yet once rarity enters the equation, logic exits. Drinkers justify absurd prices, wait in lines, celebrate possession more than experience. Owning becomes pleasure. Drinking becomes secondary. And here lies the uncomfortable truth. Some bourbons taste better because they're rare, not because they're better. Scarcity manufactures desire. Desire manufactures perceived excellence. Complexity is worshipped in bourbon culture. More notes, more layers, more descriptors. But complexity is not automatically superior. In fact, many drinkers prefer balance over chaos, smoothness over intensity, harmony over fireworks. Yet enthusiasts often confuse complex equals better, which leads to strange behavior. Bottles become impressive but not enjoyable, admired but not loved, discussed but not revisited. Because complexity can be intellectually satisfying while emotionally exhausting, the best bourbon isn't always the most complex. Sometimes it's the most drinkable. Legacy brands carry psychological weight, decades of history, cultural status, collector prestige. But legacy does something dangerous. It freezes perception. Drinkers assume greatness before sipping. Reputation replaces evaluation. History replaces curiosity. And this creates blind spots, because not every legendary bottle is legendary in the glass. Sometimes it's legendary in memory, legendary in storytelling, legendary in mythology. Yet taste evolves, palates evolve, expectations evolve, but legacy remains untouchable, protected, defended, even when reality shifts. Here's a truth nobody likes admitting. Experts and beginners often disagree, wildly, because trained palates seek nuance, beginners seek pleasure. Experts chase structure, beginners chase smoothness. Experts admire complexity, beginners admire drinkability. Which means many expert favorites feel harsh to newcomers, and many beginner favorites feel boring to enthusiasts. So what is best? Depends entirely on who is tasting. Context shapes excellence. Experience shapes preference. There is no universal truth in whiskey, only perspective. Marketing doesn't just sell bourbon, it engineers perception. Bottle design, label texture, storytelling, color palettes, everything influences expectation. Expectation influences taste. Luxury cues create premium perception. Rustic cues create authenticity perception. Minimalism creates craft perception. Before liquid touches lips, judgment already formed, which means branding partially defines flavor experience. Yes, branding.
Smoothness dominates consumer preference, especially beginners. But smoothness is tricky because smooth often means lower bite, lower intensity, lower aggression, which can sometimes mean lower character. Yet smoothness feels safe, comfortable, approachable. Drinkers reward safety, even when boldness offers deeper experiences. Smoothness wins hearts, intensity wins respect. Harshness is often mistaken for quality. High-proof burn, aggressive spice, sharp oak. Some drinkers interpret discomfort as sophistication. If it's challenging, it must be premium. But challenge does not equal superiority. Sometimes harshness is imbalance. Sometimes it's youth. Sometimes it's profile design. Yet difficulty creates prestige illusions.
Collectors experience bourbon differently. Possession becomes pleasure. Scarcity becomes status. Bottles transform into trophies. But trophies are rarely opened, rarely tasted, rarely evaluated honestly. Because once sealed, value rises. Drinking feels like loss. Budget bottles suffer prejudice. Low price equals low expectation. Low expectation equals low attention. Drinkers search for flaws instead of strengths. Yet some budget bourbons outperform prestige bottles. But perception blocks discovery. Prestige bottles feel safe, validated, socially approved. Ordering expensive bourbon signals taste sophistication, even if enjoyment difference is subtle. Prestige protects ego. Memory distorts taste. First great bourbon experience becomes benchmark. Future bottles judged against nostalgia. But memory exaggerates pleasure. Reality rarely matches remembered perfection. Worst rarely means terrible. Worst often means overhyped, overpriced, underwhelming versus expectation. Expectation defines disappointment, not liquid alone. Best rarely means perfect. Best often means unexpectedly satisfying, exceptional value, consistently enjoyable. Surprise amplifies pleasure.